Folks, welcome to the final of our 4-part series on AI in recruitment. I've got to say to the team here at Metaview, this has absolutely been one of my favorite things to do. It's been such good fun and so topical and so relevant for the moment as well. You can't get away from AI in recruitment. And I think the conversations we've had over the preceding weeks, I think have been really valuable because of our focus on the elements of the recruiting process where AI can be applied and where it might most be relevant. So today we're going to be talking about AI and data visibility, or where does it what impact AI has on the data sources that we need to do our job in recruiting. It's going to be a super exciting show for us to engage with. Let's, without further ado, let's get on with it with regards to intros. So I'm always going to be doing this with my co-pilot, Siadhal Magos. Siadhal, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? Who are you? What it is you do? Oh, Siadhal, you're on mute, my friend.
No more embarrassing way to start a webinar than talking on mute, but I did it. So there you go. So hey, folks, I'm Siadhal, one of the co-founders at Metaview. Pumped to be doing this with Hang and with the other guests today, and indeed with you folks who are listening in. To reiterate, really, the reason we're doing this, there's no doubt that AI is in the process of totally revolutionizing productivity. And there's a lot of debate, a lot of talk, a lot of discussion about what that means for various parts of business and also in recruiting. And so we just wanted to get a few folks together to talk about that. So at Metaview, we're really on a mission to enable the 10x recruiter. So our AI-powered recruiting assistant loves doing the recruiting tasks that you hate and enables you to focus much more on building relationships with candidates, but also building relationships with hiring managers so that you can build that world-class team, which we think increasingly is where, frankly, the best recruiters are going to spend their time. So definitely go and check out Metaview if you don't know of us already, and check out what we offer. I would also strongly recommend signing up to the Recruiters AI Digest newsletter, where we take a sort of a synthesis of all of the things that are happening in AI every week and really pare it down to sort of the 4 or 5 things that you really need to know about. So I'll add a link to the chat so you can subscribe to that. And yeah, thanks again for being here.
Great. Why don't we introduce ourselves? We'll go around. Manjuri, why don't you introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Hey, well, let me start with saying that I'm a big fan of pandas, and I have procured a new panda t-shirt. So I'm really crazily happy about it. That's the starting statement there. What do I do in my day job? I take care of talent acquisition, employer branding, and onboarding for OLX, which is a classifieds platform, and have about 20 years of experience in everything HR and talent acquisition. Superbly excited to be on this panel to discuss AI and everything which is good, bad, and ugly about it in recruiting.
Fantastic to see you on the show, Manjuri. And Magdalena, let's go to you. Who are you? What it is you do?
To be here as well. My name is Magdalena. I am part of the Global Talent Intelligence team at SAP since 1.5 years. Prior to that, I was part of Zalando, and I've been with them for 6 years. During this time, I worked with Manjuri. We were the sourcing recruiting gang.
Fantastic.
My background is generally in HR, and I started focusing on TA topics since 2015.
Yeah, great. And now you're doing talent intelligence, which is absolutely perfect sort of angle to bring to us. And last but very much not least, it is the legend that is Kevin Wheeler. Kevin, you kind of need no introduction, but for the few people who might not know who you are or might not even believe you're here, can you introduce yourself? Who are you and what it is you do?
I might be an avatar, I'm not sure. Yeah, I run the Future of Talent Institute, which is basically a think tank that looks at the future trends in HR and recruitment and learning development. I'm a writer, consultant, analyst. I've been doing this for many decades.
Absolutely. And Kevin, by the way, writes one of the best newsletters around future of talent. I think in terms of original writing, original thinking, it's like right up at the very top for our industry. People should definitely subscribe to that also. Kevin, why don't you drop a link into the chat there so that people can get onto that if they're not already on. Okay, let's get on with the topic. Let's start off by sort of peeling it all back to kind of the brass tacks. What would you say are the major kind of types of data that recruiters need to care about? I think a lot of people might be coming to this conversation, fairly open-minded about what we mean about what data is. Like, is every form of data important? Or are there particular things that we need to care about as recruiters when we think about recruitment quality and recruitment efficiency? So what sorts of data do we need to care about? Magdalena, why don't we go to you first, as you're the absolute pro at this. You might as well kick us off and start us off on the right foot.
Yes, and probably I should also start with the top of the funnel. So for me, one of the critical data is source of hire, because this would determine how we converse with the candidates, that we differentiate between the applicants and passive candidates. But generally, further down the line, definitely time between the recruiting stages is something of interest, because we want to influence the speed of the process. The number of interviews so far would also be an interesting metric for me. Generally, also questions that were already covered in the interviews, how horrible this is to candidate experience if they are asked all over the same questions. And then finally, conversion rates, I would say. Conversion rates, meaning how many people advance to the next stage, and what does it mean for the top of the funnel? How many people do we need at the beginning to eventually make a hire?
Amazing. See, this is why you should hire Magdalena to come in and advise your talent operations department. You kind of dealt with it right there, Magdalena. I really appreciate it. But let's go around anyway. Manjuri, do you have anything to add to what Magdalena said?
Yeah, plus one to what you said about Maggie, definitely, I think, and Magdalena, sorry, I'm not going to refer to you as Maggie on the call. I would adding to the inclusivity matrix, I think the overall pipeline funnel, where do we look at gender and how it flows? Experience, because in my world, I also take care of onboarding. So it's not just candidate experience, but the onboarding experience. So on the new hire funnel, quality data as well, quality of hire. So that can be mapped with the new hire attrition or the early leavers, as we talk about. Something that smart recruiters calls velocity, but we call it days to start. So that kind of predictive analysis on how can we fill in the positions from that perspective, how soon can we fill in those positions as such. Information from scheduling out, I guess, as well, because it's important to understand where the blocker is. Are the interviewers the blockers? Where are we rejecting the interviews? Where are we rescheduling the interviews? How much time goes into that? And does that increase your kind of time in funnel, time at stage, etc.? So those kind of time metrics also make a lot of difference.
Amazing. I hope someone's making notes, by the way, because your sort of education, I mean, I'm getting educated on this. This is like, not to say I didn't know, but I knew it in pieces. But to hear these two experts talk about it, it's kind of make it like into a single mental image for me. Kevin, kind of leaving you here a little bit hanging, given the fact that sort of Manjuri and Magdalena have said so much quality things already. Can you give us one sort of insight that you would say, okay, recruiters need to care about this particular data set that hasn't been mentioned so far?
In the last 2 weeks, I've written 2 articles, part 1 and part 2, on why I think the traditional data gathering metrics are useless and what I think the good ones are. So you might want to take a look at those. But I think the one most powerful metric is the time to present a candidate to a hiring manager. I think that's the #1 most powerful metric. The second one that goes right along with it is how many of those does the manager actually interview? And on top of that, how many of those get offered a job? So to me, that's the core. If you do those 3 things, you know if your recruiting is good or bad. All the rest of it is just secondary.
Do you have a formula for that? I'd love for there to be a Kevin Wheeler formula where you could plug those numbers in and it'll just come out with a verdict saying you're bad at recruiting.
Not really a formula, but it's sort of, if you read my article from last week, actually right. This week's article.
So someone needs to like quickly build an app that does this, that can plug in these numbers and then
I tried doing it, but my computer and math skills are not equal to it. So
all right, I'm going to deploy some resources on this and produce it, because I think it'd be quite funny to have actually an avatar of Kevin Wheeler condemn people's recruitment sort of processes based on this. This would be quite funny. All right, listen, Siadhal, on to you. Last verdict. I mean, from your observations and obviously from your kind of product build point of view, where do you see where, you know, data is important in the recruiting process?
Not a ton to add. All I can do is maybe reflect on what some of the other folks have said that sort of resonates with me in particular. I think what Kevin said there, I thought was really interesting, because a lot of the metrics he was referring to were with the hiring manager almost being the sort of the judge, which I think in many ways they are, right? If you're in an organization where the hiring manager makes the decision of who you're going to hire, then I think that's really interesting. And I think that sort of plays to a more an emotional part of recruiting, which is a lot of the time with all these metrics, they're super important. But also one of the things a recruiter cares about is, does the hiring manager respect my input? Do they, when I propose a candidate, are they excited to speak to that person because I've said I'm excited about them, which is really hard to, probably can actually be measured by some of the things Kevin mentioned, but it's also like an intangible sense, you know. It's probably only comes up when your recruiting leader asks for a performance review from the hiring manager who's been working with, and they say, I love this person, she's great to work with, whatever it might be. So I thought that's really interesting, not a metric, but really interesting. And then the only thing that I think I really can add to the conversation, I hope we get to add during the conversation, is a lot of the metrics we're talking about are they're input metrics to a final hire, but they're not a reflection of the actual behaviors that are occurring. And I think the big thing that's going to change now is we're going to have much richer data about the actual activities and behaviors that result in those metrics improving, which was never possible before. So an obvious case for us is knowing the type of things that you discuss in an interview that make it more likely you're going to have a candidate that accepts an offer is like a great example. That's the new world. Which means, but I still think the outcome metrics that everyone talked about are the correct outcome metrics.
Yeah, very, very good. I mean, a couple of things you mentioned there, just to touch on them really quickly. It would be quite interesting to compare the manager's rating of the recruiter relationship, and then compare that with the sort of acceptance rate of the submissions, because it could well be that the relationship is actually critically important to whether that's a high or low number, and that's good or bad. Like, you can have a really great, an overly good relationship with a hiring manager. They're going to accept everybody you send through because they're your mate. That's not good recruiting. But it's also bad recruiting if you've got a difficult relationship with the hiring manager and he or she is vetoing candidates that are perfectly good, because there's actually a political problem that you have with that person. So, but we don't know that unless we capture that information. So yeah, absolutely, Jean-Joseph, I think you're right. Like if we did that mutual hiring manager recruiter rating of each other, we'll get some sort of sense as to what degree that the health of that relationship is. And I guess equal numbers probably mean good things, right? But if it's like skewed in one way, then obviously there's a miscon there. Okay, let's there's a really good kind of bedrock to this conversation, but we're talking about AI here. So in what way has artificial intelligence, certainly this new wave of generative AI, changed sort of the possibilities for us? Sal, you actually touched upon it right there, so we might as well lean into what you said. You're talking about the metrics we previously had seem to be pretty much like a black and white, yes, no type of scenario. But now what you're saying is we're able to just get a lot more depth. It's almost become 3D for us, so we can understand actually why those numbers come out. Can you give us some sort of examples of what you mean, particularly to illustrate this for us?
Yeah, so a really sort of powerful example that we found relatively early, actually, in Metaview's sort of development was there was a few really interesting connection, at least correlations between well, a few things I'm about to tell you. So we did a study with one of our early customers on what seemed to most connect a recruiter screen to a hiring manager saying yes to a candidate. So what behaviors within a recruitment screen connected most closely to when that candidate got put through to the hiring manager, they also said yes. So there's a good conversion good calibration between recruiter and hiring manager. And what it turned out was there's a really interesting relationship between if a recruiter was working on a high number of recs at the same time, their average question count per screen went down. So essentially, I'm working on this is now sort of us applying our judgment, our human judgment to that data, that insight. I would imagine what that means is if you're a recruiter who's working on a lot of roles, your depth of understanding of how to assess a candidate for each role is lower, is more shallow. because you don't have the time to focus on a given role. When you get to that screen, you're less able to actually qualify and assess the candidate. So you end up just literally not having as many questions. You're not able to dig. You put more candidates through to the hiring manager, they reject more of them. So there was this false efficiency that some companies were sort of, there's this like go slow to go fast point here. We're actually hiring more recruiters so they can do a better job of really understanding the roles they're hiring for, actually saves HM's time and gets you your bum in seat more quickly. So that the new data point there that wasn't accessible before was how many questions are being asked. So that's an example of like an actual behavioral metric. What we describe as like an ambient data point. It's data that's always been there, but we've been losing it to the ether for the last however many 100 years. And now we can collect that data point. It's going to be correlative to some things, it's going to be irrelevant to other things, but now we can start to accrue that and start to understand what it actually impacts.
That's fascinating. I mean, two things to deal with there. Number one, I mean, wasn't that fascinating, folks? I mean, it makes perfect sense. It correlates to our sense of common sense. If you've got overloaded recruiters, they're going to do a poorer job screening because they don't have the time. They're going to they have to crush sort of these screens down to an acceptable time. They're going to chuck more crap over, or should we say, chuck more inappropriate candidates to the hiring manager, who then has to screen them away. So it's almost like the recruiter's pushing the work out because they're crushed with it.
And not AI related per se, but just again, understanding the behavioral economics of this. What you also then saw was those hiring managers would reduce their screen time. They would say, well, okay, fine. If you're going to send me so many candidates like this, I can only do half an hour screens for candidates. And so again, you're getting like a weaker interview. Whereas if you have that really tight calibration between the recruiter and the HM says, I'm more than happy to spend 45 minutes an hour with everyone you put through to me. And actually you're going to have a more efficient funnel beyond that too.
Wow.
So there's I think are starting to be able to pick up these connections, and also as recruiters, almost from a position of credibility and authority, understand this data, because no one else is going to try and understand this data like recruiters are. Empowers you to have much better conversations about what to change in your process. That's really, I mean, I just didn't even compute, but of course the hiring manager is going to feel more fearful of the submissions. If the submissions of poor quality, then they're going to turn down their enthusiasm and actually turn down their time because they're anticipating it's going to be a waste of time. So they're going to waste less time, this is where you have a cascading effect of no hires. Folks, isn't that a revelation? It's something we need, like literally we weren't able to solve that until we had some technology, and the technology is essentially being able to monitor what goes on in an interview. Yeah. And sorry, Hung, I know I don't want to dominate, I really want to pass on, but just to sort of bring that back to AI. So what's the AI? Where's the AI in this? The AI in this is the algorithms to automatically identify what is an assessment question in a conversation is what is new, right? Being able to determine, is this an assessment question? Is this just a conversational question? Was this a prompt for an answer? Or was this just a sort of a, part of an everyday conversation? That sounds simple, but that's actually really hard to do. And it's only sort of now becoming possible to start to identify that in every conversation that's happening in all of your interview rooms across the whole company. Right. I see. So go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, so couldn't we actually use AI to generate those questions that are asked, and perhaps even ask those questions on behalf of the manager as the initial screen? I mean, I don't see why we couldn't automate that whole front end screening process by using algorithms that are constantly being checked by the results of, did the person get hired, did the person get interviewed, feed that back in to modify those questions and develop a really powerful set of screening questions that are validated with data that actually do choose out the very best candidates. Yeah, I think I think that's 100% part of the future. I do think you'll have different organizations that take different positions on that, right? Like, well, maybe they'll be the more candidate-centric. Maybe some people will perceive that as not very candidate-centric. And actually they think the cost of having a human doing it is well worth it to hire this amazing talent. Whereas I imagine you'll have the more commoditized roles will go that way first. And then it'll be interesting to see where it sort of, does it end up being every role that goes that way, or does it sort of like tap out at sort of, certain sort of levels of role? It's going to be hard to imagine, say, if you're bringing in a CTO or a CEO, you're probably less likely to do that. So from one end of the spectrum to the other, it's going to sort of affect it to different levels.
It's actually,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Kevin, great idea, but you hit the nail on the head, Siadhal, there. It's very persona based. We've seen, we've experimented with Velocity, with VCV on video interviewing. And if we want to put things at scale for retail hiring, volume-based hiring, I think that's a major, major advantage. That really speeds things up. But would I really want to do that for a C-suite level hire? Would I want to really do that for somebody who's coming in as a senior iOS engineer, et cetera? I think those are also to do with the candidate preferences and the experience itself. It's a lot of behavior change.
Yeah.
What you just mentioned, and it's an excellent use case that you use. We tried to do this even before with our ATS, with Greenhouse. We used to work with Greenhouse at that time. Now we work with Lever. And a recruiter actually pulled up certain scorecards for the past 20, 25 interviews for a director of product and saw that in the feedback, there was a bias for, kind of failure than bias to hire. And that assimilation process, that's where we need the AI, right? Because that's the assimilation that if a recruiter has to do, probably 2 or 3 hours of work per recruiter, right? And it's a lot to do. And that'll be great to have an assess. But what would it need? It'll need hiring managers and interviewers to really fill good scorecards. If they don't fill good scorecards, we will never get these results, even with an algorithm. So I think that change of behavior is what we need to tackle as well.
Magdalena, I want to bring you into this because you mentioned something about source of hire and then altering or varying our approach on communication based on that source of hire. And that makes total sense, of course, because someone applies to an advert, you can understand their motivation is going to be different compared to someone you've like headhunted, let's say. I just wonder whether Kevin's automated interviewer might be deployed variably in that context. So in other words, anybody comes in with an advert, sure, you could just deploy the AI interviewer against them or her. Whereas if you've headhunted someone or you've tried to kind of pull them in, you've outreach to them, then at no point probably would the AI interview would work. Any thoughts to share on that? Would that make sense?
Probably today, passive candidates would appreciate the personalized approach. But I would be positive or optimistic that perhaps in the future, like 20, 30 years from today, even the CEO could be interviewed by the tool. If we imagine Generation Z getting to the C-suite, I mean, they will also change the game of recruitment.
I love it. I love the AI being the final boss of the interviews. Let's make this happen.
But at what point, if I'm a sort of a wannabe CEO, I'm an experienced person. I am also probably going to have my own AI assistant able to field some of these AI interviews, and I think that is. I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a fusion, right? I don't think it's necessarily at some point it might be sort of like completely just API driven decisioning at some level, but at some point there's this fusion of we are all augmented by this technology. We're having a new definition of what a conversation is, where it's partially automated, but partially, I'm providing the alpha by being the human, and as is the interviewer. Otherwise, we're all just going to get matched to jobs in the, by at birth or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, on that, I think we can go ahead, Kevin.
It's like the intermediary situation. A recruiter right now is an intermediary, right? It's in between the hiring manager and the candidate. And the only reason the recruiter is there is because historically, the volume of candidates is huge. Managers are theoretically way too busy to deal with this, although they shouldn't be. And so we have recruiters that kind of do this filtering out of the candidates. But I think artificial intelligence can be a huge percentage of the replacement of the recruiter and move the recruiter's role to a very different role, an important role, but a different role. And the AI can be that intermediary between the recruiter, can help to generate the job descriptions, can help to post those things in the most appropriate places that's going to result in the most candidates, can provide those screening questions. I think some positions are very skill oriented, like a retail sales associate or a call center person. So those are very easy to analyze using AI. Right now, the CEO is a personality-based thing, which is a whole different thing. You're assuming whoever's interviewing for a CEO has skills. What you're really doing is seeing is he the right fit, the right culture fit, the right personality. AI isn't quite there yet, but it probably will be, to Magdalena's point, I think in, I don't know how many years, probably sooner than we think. It'll get there. So the role of a recruiter is being redefined completely, will be, by AI and where it's going. And a lot of the things that we think are really valuable and important today are, I think, not going to be in probably just 5 years from now, as AI is just massively transforming what's going on.
Yeah, and this is why we have an audience signing into this webinar, because I think recruiters are way aware of this. We know that the world of work is changing, and we're very thirsty for this type of information. So it's great that everyone is involved here. Folks, I didn't even mention, but I should have done. Please, if you have any questions for our guests at any moment, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We're going to get to those questions at the end of this conversation. So obviously we're on the chat there, so we can continue to chat. But if you have a specific question you definitely want to for us to address, pop it in the Q&A and we'll get there towards the end of the show. Okay, let's talk about more use cases about where AI is going to go. We've talked about sort of trying to figure out using sort of AI to help us understand what is going on in this ambient space, or at least with ambient data, which previously we weren't able to collect. And this is particularly with regards to interview. Going specifically to Manjuri and Magdalena here, maybe even more you, Manjuri, as you're still in the operating function of leading a team. Where are you most excited about the deployment of AI within the recruiting function? I mean, do you see it going to a certain place where you think that would be awesome if we could kind of do that? What's your thoughts?
The best gift that I would look at home in the AI space would be skill-based hiring, but internal first. We lose out a lot because we don't upskill at the right time. We lose out a lot because we don't consider which are the mandatory skills, which are the need to have on the capabilities in the next 1 year, 1.5 years. If we can have algorithms which matches what we need, plus what we have and what we need to build up, we can create a lot of internal mobility within the organization, giving value to the business, retaining more people, and upskilling in the process. And I think this is something that everybody's talking about skill-based hiring, but I would like to look at this internal first and then go external.
Hang on. Let me interrupt you, Manjuri. I do beg your pardon. I'm running a skill-based hiring topic in Brainfood Live Code Weeks. Come and join that, because basically we need more brains on that. Okay, continue, please, Manjuri.
Yeah, and I think the other one which I can throw in the 3 priorities. The second one would be, and every time I speak with Danny Hodgson, I think this comes up, is the demand planning. All of us in tech organizations, from the big boys in the metas to organizations like us, and even recent startups, are dealing with results of bad planning today. We go into a hyper growth phase, we hire like crazy, we put a lot of pressure, and we know what is happening right now. Demand planning is a big topic. That predictive analysis on simulated models, so what it could look like with attrition, which is at 10% or 20%. If we go into different markets, what it could look like if we have a location-based strategy on talent, etc. And this is something, as we don't think about it, because we in recruiting think that we are order takers. This is the shift. We have to start our work from the demand planning aspect. And that's where I think AI can really help talent leaders coming together and presenting a business use case as well. And last but not the least is, I think, around widening the talent pool. And I was reading an amazing story from this company called Clue. It's UK based, as I understand. They are a platform which looks at underrepresented communities, and they have a base of 7,000 candidates there. It's interesting because they work on a skill-based approach and not a degree resume-based approach. And 18% of their candidates on that platform identify as people with disabilities. I think 6% are identifying as non-binary. So imagine if we can use AI to boost such kind of talent pools, we can actually reach out to more of these communities, which we can't today because we're just blind to that data. So I think these 3 areas will be very, very helpful for talent leaders in the future.
That's really, really well analyzed and well broken down for us, Manjuri. I think we can spend a little bit of time on each of those topics, actually, because they're worth exploring. I mean, firstly, with the internal mobility piece, that's like a massive problem forever, isn't it? Like, we don't know the skills that people have. We don't know the progress of their skills. People aren't just static individuals. We learn, and actually our skills can degrade also. But we walk in with a bunch of skills, we get assessed on those skills, and then we forget about it. We don't know the status of the skills. We definitely don't know the status of the motivation until the person hands in the notice and actually leaves the company, and we're desperate to bring them back. We have an opportunity discovery problem. Like, how do we actually find there's an opportunity? I think we're still stuck on internal job boards, for instance, which are super inefficient. And we have like a kind of a political problem internally. Like, what does it mean to apply to an internal job? I mean, does that mean my boss is now thinking that I'm untrustworthy? What if I don't get the job? Does my boss know that I decide to leave? All these questions, right? So there's seriously things happening. That's why we go. Thoughts on this, Kevin? Your thoughts on it in particular? Have you put any thinking around internal mobility, the problems we currently have, and where you might think, let's say, AI might support us? Unlock some of this, make us a little bit more liquid. Let's say, can AI be the lubricant for internal mobility?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent a lot of time on this area. I mean, I think number one, it's a corporate culture issue. It's about, is it okay in your company for people to move from jobs to jobs inside a company? And for lots of organizations, it's just not something the company supports. They think you should not leave whatever role you're doing to go to another role. Other companies, some of the larger companies in the world, historically, the IBMs, the Philips, and so forth, they've had very aggressive and very positive internal promotion culture that's allowed for that to happen. So that's number one. Number two, you've got to have HR policies that support that and make it possible to do that. And then you need the data, then you need the information. And there's new tools arriving every day now using AI to help do the skills assessment inside the company. What kind of skills do you already have? Kind of doing that, helping you do that talent planning for what do you, and Manjuri's points about talent planning are right on target. We're terrible at it. We need to get much, much better at supply chain thinking. And where's our supply coming from? How do we get it? And how do we make sure that we have the supply that we need through development as well as through acquisition? And development internally is the best place to do that. And then you develop people and move them through. So finding out what are the skills we need, who are the people that potentially might be able to fill those roles, what kind of development should they get in order to do that? They might be missing a skill or two, and maybe AI could help identify where they should get that development, could even provide that training for them, offer it to them, and say, here's some tools. If you learn these things, these opportunities might be available to you. So, I mean, there's endless places that AI and analytics can play a role in the internal development of people and promotion. But it all rests on two foundations, culture and policy. And if they aren't there, then the rest of it's just a waste of time.
Is Microsoft not going to solve this? Because this strikes me that all of these problems are going to be solved by Microsoft. They're sitting there, right? They've got all the Microsoft Office. Everyone's using the Office tools. They've got Teams. They've got Copilot, obviously. And they're going to launch 365 Copilot and deploy it everywhere. They're going to know what you're good at. Oh my God, Sal spends like 2 hours on that spreadsheet. He's terrible at that. He needs to, here's some skills training. That's a nudge for you. Off you go. Let's move Sal away from spreadsheet orientated work because he's terrible at this. Something like Microsoft could do it. Do you think, and an open question for everyone, Magdalena, Sal, you both get involved in this as well. Do you think it might take a monstrous company like Microsoft to be able to just roll it out to everybody? Or is it going to be like too difficult for a corporate business to try and stitch it all together themselves? Like, how are they going to do it when they've got 100 systems that don't talk to each other? They've got this terrible a task of trying to extract the data, move it around, etc., etc. How's that going to work without Microsoft? Thoughts, please, Siadhal and Magdalena.
I guess that the business are the sort of the huge incumbents best place to like win in that space, or let's just say help customers achieve this more quickly if it's something we want to achieve. I don't know. I mean, there is a lot of fragmentation in general, and a lot of these organizations who have a more fragmented stack essentially choose tools that have APIs that can talk to each other, and so you can achieve a lot of that benefit without sort of going whole hog and using Microsoft for everything, right? So I use Figma when I'm getting involved in design. That's not a Microsoft owned tool, and it's my preferred. So like, there's always going to be this fragmentation. So I don't know how key that's going to be. And I think the sort of sensitivity that the tool developers need to have to the workflows that they're sort of enabling for their people is always going to be, again, there's like millions and millions of workflows. The product managers, no matter how AI assisted they are at Microsoft, are never going to build the perfect product for each of those workflows. So yeah, I don't think necessarily that that's like a foregone conclusion at all. What I'm really trying to think about, I guess, is what does AI actually change about some of these things? Because you can sort of track people's work on various tools right now if you want to, but the reality is people aren't really using it to and fusing it with other data points and making observations or making predictions based on it. And I guess that's what's going to change, right? Right now, we make predictions. You're asked to make a prediction. How many people do you think you're going to need in your team? Predict it for me, please. You might not call it a prediction, but it's essentially a prediction. Who do you predict out of these people is going to be the one who's going to best execute in that role? And so if you think of AI as essentially a prediction machine, you're just going to get aided and aided in making better and better predictions. And at some point, other people in the organization are going to realize, well, this person seems to go against the prediction that the recommended prediction more often than not, and they're getting it right and they're getting it wrong. And you sort of there's this like endless feedback loop. So yeah, a bit of a sort of meandering thought there really, but just, I still think it's that the idea that these predictions that whether we think of them as predictions or not, that we're making every day about headcount planning, about who we bring into the company, these are the things where AI is going to, I think, touch in the short term. They're literally going to help us with those decisions in the relatively short term. Yeah.
Any thoughts, Magdalena?
Yes. I think I would start with just saying that AI is not magic. There is still a human behind the AI that needs to conceptualize how do we collect data, what data do we collect, and then ensure that the algorithm gets enough data and is trained on this data. So how can, in that sense, AI really predict anything if it's not fed any sort of data, right? If AI will not stand by themselves what is good or bad. So for me, even now, if Microsoft would monitor any sort of usage of all of their products across all of the employees of a huge company, this sheer volume of data is just overwhelming. And because there is no structure to it, even if it's collected, how is it collected, right? Along which variables? How is it normalized to be even to be able? So that's a couple of thoughts.
I feel like that's exactly the problem that's sort of going to go away, right? Yes, there's lots and lots of unstructured data, and that's exactly what AI is orders of magnitude more effective at bringing out insights from than we are. Like we are never going to create the sort of the man-made. We're never going to engineer the data to give us all the answers we need. We just now have this superhuman capability to understand this unstructured data. And actually, yeah, that's why this is a revolution, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but just a quick one for the crowd here. I have the impression that sort of LinkedIn stroke Microsoft are already kind of like in a soft way are already doing a lot of this. Like they're doing predictive type of comments, for instance. They're starting to appear a lot more. Have you experienced anything new on your Microsoft stack that, you know, it's suddenly seemed to be, you know, giving you a nudge or giving you some sort of recommendation? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on that. Okay, we've kind of lost Magdalena for the moment, but I'm sure she's coming back. But I do want to address Jacob's comment there, where he mentioned that in 12 months, data will be everywhere. Is AI going to be is it going to force, it's going to create a lot more data, number one. So not only does it mine data, but it will produce its own data. Will it force HR and TA departments to become much more data centric? I've read this thought somewhere. I forget who it was who said this, but obviously there's still a movement for us to move to a more data-driven way of working. Does AI generally, will it force us to do it to the point where actually we no longer have a choice? Because firstly, it's getting fed all this data, but it also spits data out. What are your thoughts on this? Kevin, let's go to you first.
Yes. I think if the HR function doesn't become more data centric and the recruiting function, it's going to just disappear. It has to. I mean, it's all about using the data to learn and make decisions based on it. We already do that with our own brains and our own body in a very poor way, I guess I could say, a very non-data driven way. We use a lot of emotion. We talk about AI being biased. We're far, far more biased than AI is. So I mean, it's sort of it's an argument you can really get into here about data and how it's used. But we all are using data every day. It's just how much of it are we using, what kind of it are we using, and how are we using it? And humans use a very selective set of data that our bias leads us to use and drives us to make our decisions. AI uses all of the data, theoretically, and tries to make a decision based on, or make a recommendation based on the results of that data and what you're trying to achieve. So for me, ultimately, data is where we have to go. I'm not saying humans aren't important. They're critically important. But the bottom line is, in order to make the best decision, you need to have good, massive volume of good data, of data. I'm not going to say good or bad, just data, and analyze that data, and then let that data come to a conclusion, and not let our unbiased interpretation of it come into it.
I think, broadly speaking, my instinct is to agree with you, Kevin, but I can also try and invoke maybe the oppositional view, which is not perhaps not even an oppositional view, but it's more like an instinct, where there may be some resistance in the sense of kind of a human concession of control, which is sort of anxiety inducing. So I think a lot of the people might feel, you know what, all that sounds well and good, but I feel like the human, still needs to be in control of that situation. But that's a segue we can't go down right now. Let's keep exploring where we think AI will have greatest impact in the recruiting flow. Manjuri,
on that, hang just real quick on the point around, does that require recruiters or people in recruitment to get more data savvy? I think there might be a bifurcation. I think for some cases it might be the opposite, because you actually have access to AI that is actually sort of does intuit what you're trying to achieve, and is far better at the analysis than you are. So to the point, why is that the thing that you're going to try and be better at than these large language models, which is there's no competition. So I'm not sure. I actually think there could be a sort of a regression is the wrong word, but sort of like Back to the Future type moment where actually no, it's the sort of the data decisions are being made for me, although sort of the decisions that require copious amounts of data are being made for me, and my job is to do the things that are on the periphery that we find it really hard to parameterize. So things like interpreting whether this person is actually excited about this role, and whether and thinking about what question I should ask next given that. In the fullness of time, those things may go away as well. But the sort of the being really, it's going to be those emotional things that are last to be sort of ingested, and sort of like the predictions of AI are going to be better than ours. So yeah, I think it might go the other way, basically.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of kind of return to the gut feel approach, which I'm very much pro. Throw the data out, folks.
Maybe I think gut feel has a bad rep though, right? But it's more. I think sometimes we use gut feel and it's like a negative, and sometimes what we really mean is real insights that I'm not able to articulate because we just don't have the sort of high enough resolution in our language. But it's still something there.
Yeah, you know what? I hate to invoke the guy, but this is the Donald Trump approach to recruitment. And Donald Trump, whatever your opinions of Donald Trump, he has a recruitment philosophy. He will look you in the eye and think, do I like his face or do I like her face or whatever? And he'll make the decision based on that. Total disregard of any other form of due diligence. Obviously, he makes horrendous errors in this approach. But at the same time, he's almost like the cartoon example of what you're talking about, in the sense that he would be great if there was actually a data substrate to what he was doing. It's like if there was an objective way to produce a level of competence and then have a Trumpian gut call at some point, that wouldn't be a bad combo. What are your thoughts, folks? Is that a provocation you like or not? Do I come off air? I don't know. Okay, Manjuri, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think, an AI algorithm can do exactly that. So if you're talking about matching profiles, right? And that's the interesting bit, and that's the playing the devil's advocate here. We know behaviors are different. From LinkedIn studies, we know that, women don't apply to jobs if you don't 100% match to it. If you're asking me as a woman to add my skills on a platform, and that list of skills is going to get matched in the background somewhere with the requirements there, and then give an indication of I'm going to be more successful than the other candidate or not, and put me on that stack ranking stage, I will not probably put the fifth skill if I think I'm not the best in it. But vis-a-vis, if there's a man who would actually go and put probably 5 other skills, which he just thinks that, yeah, I think I've heard of it, I can do it. And then this is going to be going into the funnel, and my candidature will not go into the funnel. So if you see see Netflix shows like Code Bias, this is where the challenge comes in. We say, yes, we are human. As humans, we are more biased, but if we are in that process, we know that these are behaviors. They could be a obstacle remover in the human process. So I think we need to be educated on the data usage and AI, also to flip this around. We were discussing this right before the webinar started, Hong. We were talking about the malevolent use of AI, right? And I think to be careful about this, we also need to educate our teams on TA, HR, on how this can really flip to a bad side, and what kind of measures or barriers can we create there as well? Because it can be scary. It can really be scary. We've seen examples of, there was a lot of controversy recently. I don't know, some event used AI generated image of a woman speaker. We all know that in cases of conferences, the ratio of men to women is still something to be concerned about. So if you have AI generated women now being put on stages, what happens to the real women out there? So those are things that we have to be super skeptical about as well.
That's a really important point. I mean, it's actually quite interesting. It's a segue I don't think we have the time to get into, but it's worth exploring. What is the potential job displacement or role displacement that AI generated avatars might actually emerge from? For instance, the 2 examples of newsreaders I've seen that are AI newsreaders that are both female newsreaders for some reason. Maybe that's a very small sample size, but perhaps there was some idea that perhaps that is a more welcome to the audience, etc. You could probably even use the audience analytics to determine whether you put a male or female figure up there as an avatar, but potentially there's going to be some gender variance in terms of who gets displaced there. Okay,
we're all going to have our own. We're all going to have our own personal newsreaders soon enough. So,
well, I would be pro. We talked about this, but let's get into this. What are your thoughts about having individuated AIs? Because right now we're talking about in the recruitment context, putting them into the system or the platform. But what does it look like if we have it's kind of individuated AIs that help recruiters do their job? What does that world look like? Is it feasible? And if so, what kind of things do you anticipate that person doing? Magdalena, have you any thoughts on this bit of science fiction?
For me, I would reduce it to automation, basically an assistant that helps you, maybe takes care of certain tasks, and the recruiter does not even know that they need to be done, because basically they are being done without much attention.
We kind of lost you there a little bit there, Magdalena. Would you mind repeating what you last said?
Okay.
Okay, I don't think we're going to get
there. I just think that the automation piece.
Okay, it's okay, Magdalena. I think we've got it. The automating sort of activities that the recruiter might want to get rid of. And that actually makes sense, by the way, folks, because if the thing is automatable, it's going to be AI-able, if you like. The routine is the thing that's going to be most in danger. We have to lean into the stuff that basically still requires the human touch, not necessarily because human beings will execute more efficiently than AI, but because the human being on the other side would prefer that service to be delivered by another human being, irrespective of whether it's technically better or worse. Thoughts on this, Manjuri? Individuated AIs, would you like to have one? What would that thing be doing if you had it?
Love to have that. I think there's a lot of mundane tasks, and adding on to what Magdalena said on mundane tasks, right? Scheduling is something we already do it. So we use a tool called Good Time, which uses machine learning, calendar matching tools, and we've seen the advantages there. Assimilation of feedback. That is something that can really help, rather than going through each feedback that the interviewers have given, sitting with in the decision loop, whether you're in a committee form or a bar raiser form. Assimilate that feedback, bring out what really comes out. And I think this is where AI can also help on identifying biases in the feedback as well, and call those out during the decision-making process, leaning into saying that this person can be 70% successful, but if you kind of impart so-and-so training in the first 3 months or first 6 months, can be 100% successful. That means hire plus add on, right? So don't reject. Ideally, you would have rejected that. So I think this kind of assimilation, what will really help recruiters to become superheroes in this process is data plus AI enabled, telling the story to the hiring managers and creating those, as John Vaslika says, teachable moments there for hiring managers.
That's a great vision, Manjuri. I love it when we kind of, we have a very binary approach to hiring, don't we? It's like a yes/no kind of approach. But actually, what if we understood what the elements were missing from this node candidate, and then we match it to what our training program already had in plan, and think, oh, we're going to fill that gap in 3 months. That person suddenly becomes a much more viable candidate as a result. And we might actually change the weighting of the things that we're looking for. Again, we have the data. It's just simply scattered in places where we can't collect and capture. Very, very good. Okay, Kevin, go to you with this. Individuated AIs, what would you see? Do you see this happening? And if so, if not, why not? But if so, what would you see them doing for individual recruiters?
Yeah, I think it's sort of happening already in organizations that are embracing it. It's things like conversational chatbots that are really good at that, which can take a lot of the upfront screening load off of a recruiter. I think Manjuri mentioned a lot of the tools, scheduling, a lot of the administration tools already are available and can be used by recruiters to take a lot of the workload off of them. I think ChatGPT is obviously going to help with creating job postings and writing job descriptions that are better and actually posting them online. So I mean, I think there's just all sorts of places where AI and the chatbot world kind of come together. And I kind of look at chatbots as the ultimate avatar or robot. And I think eventually you could have a chatbot that portrayed you as a recruiter. It was in your avatar, basically. And that the candidate would think they're talking to you, but you're actually talking to the chatbot. I think that's going to happen. People may not like that, or it may strike people as artificial or something, but I think it's actually inevitably going to happen. So I think, a candidate might initially only talk to the robot and not even know he's not talking to the recruiter, and then eventually get passed off perhaps to the recruiter. So, I mean, there's a lot of things on the verge of happening.
I think so. This goes to your point, Siadhal, earlier with the bot-to-bot communications. I believe that's going to happen, right? I'm looking forward to it. I think that would be quite funny. Not funny, but be amusing to see the dialogue. You could probably recall it, right? You could probably watch it, see what happens, and train it yourself. You could say, look, I wasn't happy with how my bot communicated with Kevin's bot there. Do this again, whatever, and you could just kind of create some sort of scenario there. Okay, folks, we're coming to the end of the show, so let's go to the questions. Let's go. I'm gonna. Is there a voting system here? I don't know. Okay, there kind of is. All right, we're just going to go with them anyway. Let's go with Chris's first one. By the way, folks, I'm going to direct the question to an individual person. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm just going to throw it open. You answer it as you see fit. So for Chris, will AI be considered and potentially vetoed by data processing laws in countries and regions? So this is related to the recent banning of ChatGPT in Italy, for instance. Is that going to be a larger problem? Is it going to be more than Italy that bans this? Thoughts on this? Siadhal, do you want to give this a shot?
Yeah, I'm going to do a really boring answer, say it depends. I think AI is a massive, massive bucket, right? So it's not, there's not going to be a regulation that says AI is not allowed. There's just going to be there's existing regulations that may have to adapt around how you need to treat people's personal data and data that's controlled by organizations, and the services we use that leverage this new generative AI technology will have to respect those things. But I don't think there's anything that's like it's not like this revolution that's occurring is actually incompliant by design. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just has to be melted, it just has to be molded to fit into regulation, or regulation needs to be adapted to respect this new capability and still retain the sentiment of the regulation, the sort of the direction and sentiment of the regulation, but tweaking maybe some of the sort of the tactical elements of it.
Yeah, I think so. Basically, remember, all of these laws were written 5 years or so ago. They were made law 5 years ago, but they were actually in the pipeline 10 years before that. And you think about what the legislators 15 years or so ago were thinking to try and they were stopping data scraping and stuff like this. They weren't thinking about AI at all. So
I would also say that I like, overall, as someone who's been working in working with really personal data, I guess, for a long time, and applying AI to it. Things like GDPR, even if you don't agree with, like, even if sometimes some of the corners of it are a little bit, annoying to get around or something, like, or not annoying to respect or whatever, like, it's not perfect, obviously. Overall, I think it's a really good statement that it's the start of the journey for humans, of us, to all realize that we own and can control our data. And I think once people get their head around that, actually it opens up your ability to sort of leverage some of these tools more, because you have control. I think we need to build some of the infrastructure so that people can decide what bits of their data can and can't be used and all these things. But I think in generations, decades to come, it will actually be a really positive step, because we'll trust things more because we understand how we can control them. Whereas the vacuum it replaced was, oh God, I just feel like people are using my data. I've got no idea why they're allowed to do that. And that's a good thing that we don't have that situation anymore.
Yep. Okay. We have to zoom through these questions. I'm going to summarize Megan's question there. Actually, is a comment really worth looking at. So please look at the wider comment. But what Megan's saying here is basically we have one party saying, look, AI is problematic. If we're using AI to make hiring decisions, that's no go. There's laws against that, or at least there's legislation going against this way. And then she's mentioning there's other sort of movements to say, if you don't use AI, then that should be made illegal, because we know human-driven processes are very inherently biased. So which one are we going to go for here, folks? We might just do a quick vote between the panelists. Do you think we're going to ban AI effectively in hiring decisions, or do you think we're going to ban not using AI in hiring decisions? What are your thoughts? Quick answer only. Manjuri, you go first.
It's midway home, so I don't think a complete ban should happen. Barriers with and checks with. So I think that Orion updated on this audit process that New York has put in place. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly, Kevin, are we going to ban AI or not ban AI, or ban the non-use of AI? Like, you have to use AI.
We might try to ban AI, but we're not going to be able to. And so, I mean, we're not going to ban AI. It's Pandora's out of the box.
How about you, Magdalena? Do you see anybody banning the non-use of AI? You have to use this robot.
Neither nor.
Okay, very good. How about you, Sal? Final thoughts on this?
Humans will be held accountable for their decisions as ever, and they'll use whatever tools that they want to get them to that decision they're comfortable with as quickly as possible. Yeah,
very, very good. Folks, we're out of time. Sorry for Ryan and the other person who asked the question. We're not going to be able to get to them. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed the series. I believe the entire series is replayable. Stephanie, let me know whether that's true or not. If you are interested in this, in fact, it doesn't matter, because you've registered for this webinar. Stephanie will email you the entire list, I believe, of all of the previously recorded shows we've had. Please do avail yourself to them. I think there's some fantastic conversations that went throughout there. Make sure you sign up to the Metaview newsletter. It is one of the very few ones that are doing a superb job of essentially curating the AI innovations that are happening so quickly. No one else can keep in touch with it. So you sign up to this, it's going to keep you up to date. Make sure you sign up to Kevin's newsletter also. That gives you the wider thinking, clear, original thinking in terms of what you want to do. And follow Magdalena, follow Manjuri on LinkedIn, follow everyone here on LinkedIn. apart from me, because I can't accept your connection request anyway, but follow the other 4 on screen. They're people you need to learn from. Okay, that's about it, folks. It's been wonderful having sort of a conversation with you. Please enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of the week. We'll see you at some other event, some other conference, some other conversation another time.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.